Hi everyone, let's talk about Golden Pothos care. Golden Pothos is a very popular type of houseplant. You may have seen my video on the Marble Queen Pothos, which is this really beautiful white and green pothos. If not, I will have that link down in the description. But you want to care for these guys very similarly to how you would as the Marble Queen Pothos. Pothos is popular and very easily readable for a good reason. These guys are super hardy and very easy to care for. They are one of the few low light tolerant plants. And what I mean by that is that these guys can be in an area that doesn't receive a ton of light and they can still do okay. That doesn't mean that they're going to love their new conditions in a darker environment. However, they can tolerate it for longer periods of time than a plant that requires much more sunlight. So, these guys are really pretty. They have this green and kind of golden variegation on it, hence the name Golden Pothos. They're a vining plant and very easy to care for, as I mentioned. The Golden Pothos is a climbing plant, more usually found natively in tropical areas, so you're going to want to give this plant relatively good humidity conditions. And if you have something like a moss pole or a sphagnum pole for this plant to grow up on and vine on, these leaves are actually going to get much larger than they are now. So you could just have a moss pole in your pot and wrap this guy around there. And then these little nodes on the back that have these little tiny roots sticking out will actually grow and kind of wrap themselves around the pole that you have to anchor it in place. Watering conditions for these guys, I would let the soil get dry in between your waterings. They have a relatively waxy cuticle on them, not super thick leaves, so I wouldn't expose them to tons of direct light. Although I keep this Golden Pothos in a north-facing bay window that gets probably about an hour and a half worth of daylight between the hours of like 5 to 7. So it does get some direct sunlight, but it's later in the evening whenever the sun's rays aren't nearly as powerful. If you're ever not sure about your watering conditions, I do have a link for a soil probe in the description. If you've never used one of these, I also have a video on how to, but I'm actually just going to stick this down into the soil and it will tell me how much moisture is left in my soil, and that will indicate to me whether or not I need to dry it. Once you get bigger pot sizes, if you don't want to get your finger dirty by sticking it into your soil, it's definitely beneficial to get one of those guys so you don't have to worry about, getting down and dirty or overwatering or underwatering your plant. So as you can see, if you guys let this plant vine, it's just going to go kind of crazy. It's going to get super long. So I'm going to show you guys how to propagate these. Very simple to propagate. What you're going to need is a vessel of water, or if you want to soil propagate them, a vessel of soil. And you're going to need a plant and some clean shears. So let's just go over this. I'm going to choose to take off part of this vine, partly because it's so long and I need to kind of fill out the top of this plant a little bit more. What I'm most likely going to do is let these guys water propagate until they have some roots, stick them into this pot just to kind of fill it out and make it more of a bushy plant. So I'm just going to pick anywhere along my vine and I'm going to cut below where one of the leaves come out. So I'm probably going to go in between these two leaves here. So I can either cut below this leaf or I can cut below this leaf. So let's just go ahead, grab my clean shears, and I'm just going to cut right there. So now I have this long vine, not connected to any plant or anything. So now that that is done, I'm just going to trim along in between each of where these leaves come out. So I'm going to make sure that I have a little bit of stem below where those node roots are coming out. And I'm just going to go along this vine and do that for each of these areas here. So now I have one leaf that looks like this. And you can see on the bottom here, there's that little root coming out there. That's where the root is going to start coming out of once I put this in soil. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this along the rest of that vine, and I will see you guys in a minute. All right, everyone, so I have all of my cuttings done here. We can kind of trim these cuttings down a little bit. I can take off really the only part that you're going to want to keep, is the area where the node is, right underneath where that stem is coming out of the the vine here. So really like this area right here is the most crucial part to keep. So I'm just going to cut off some of this extra that I have. Not really necessary to have that. That will help me anchor it down into the soil once these roots come out, but it's not really necessary to have. So I'm going to go ahead and trim back some of these cuttings, and I'll be right back. Okay everyone, so now I have these bits of vine. I'm just going to compost all of these and add them to the garden. Something to note is the very newest growth at the end of a vine. So like if I were to propagate this vine, for example, this newest leaf, I can almost guarantee you, is not going to do well. Maybe even this one, the newer leaf behind that one, is not going to do the best once you propagate it. Because these guys aren't really well established yet, I've definitely had the problem where these newer leaves don't form any roots and they end up just dying in the cup. So don't be alarmed if you notice that happening to your propagations. Not a huge deal. This would be a leaf example that may not make it, but we will see. So I just have a clean glass of water here. I'm just going to, it's very simple, just stick my cuttings down into this water here. And over a period of time, you're going to see little white roots starting to form on the end of those what are now brown nubs. And because they're staying moist, they're basically being told to start to grow again. Pothos cuttings do take a little while to root. In my experience, it's taken them a few months in like warmer conditions to really root to the point where I want to plant them. So I'm not going to plant these cuttings until I really feel like they have around 2 inches of root growth. I want to make sure that I'm replacing this water here pretty regularly. You definitely don't have to put like 40 cuttings into 1 cup like I am right now. It's actually kind of crowded in there and the roots are going to start entangling themselves, but for all intents and purposes, I'm just going to put them all into 1 cup today. And let me grab a pothos propagation plant that I have and I'll show you what that looks like. So here are some finished plants. These guys were water rootings from this plant that I took, let the roots grow inside of water, and then I planted them. And you can see, once they're planted, they just kind of take off. So you can see this is a good example of one. The roots that are below the soil there were grown in water. I stuck it in here, and then it started to kind of establish itself and create a new plant. So for best results, I would say that you want to start off with like a 4 to 6 inch planter with a few cuttings in there to keep it pretty robust. If you only put 1 or 2 cuttings inside of your new plant, you're not going to have a very robust plant, and you're probably going to have to propagate some more into the soil for it to be really bushy and full. Something else to note, if I didn't say this already, you want to switch out the water that you're rooting these cuttings in once every few days. That will keep the roots healthy, and it will keep a steady oxygen supply in the water for the roots to grow for best results. If you see it get slimy or anything like that, it happens. It just means that you are either exposing that to direct sunlight, which I wouldn't recommend, or you're not changing that water frequently enough. I would just rinse off those cuttings really, really well. Make sure you're getting all of that bacteria or fungus or whatever's growing on in there. And then replace that water and make it fresh. So whenever you first put these cuttings into soil, it's going to be a bit of a shock for the plant because they were just used to being in such a moist environment. So it's a good thing to get in the practice of keeping your soil on the slightly moister side whenever you first plant your propagations. That's going to make it a little bit easier for those guys to establish in soil and get used to their new home. Once they're a little more established, like these guys are here, you can see it's starting to grow more. These cuttings are in the soil firmly. Shows to me that it's nice and rooted, it's established. Now I can let these guys dry out like a normal plant, and I don't have to worry about, stunting the growth or shocking the cuttings by putting them in such a dry environment whenever they were so previously used to such a moist environment. So I actually had one marble queen cutting And I just stuck it in here with this golden pothos cutting. It kind of looks pathetic, but you can see you can do this with the Marble Queen as well. It's not the healthiest looking propagation by any means, but once this guy starts to create more growth and push out some new vinage, I'm sure it'll pick up and it will be fine. So, hey guys, Golden Pothos, awesome house plant, very resistant to pests or anything like that. Let your soil dry out pretty well before you water it again. Bright indirect to very little moderate bright direct light. Super easy to propagate. Cheap and easy to find too. All right, everyone. Bye.